Hello everyone, welcome to our presentation on fatigue. This is Isabel, Ursula, Anne-Marie, and Alejandro. For our argument, we believe that Lar is experiencing mainly peripheral fatigue during exercise. So for some information on Lar's background, he was a very avid athlete growing up in Norway, competing in the biathlon and winning the junior national championship. He was set up to go pro when he suddenly suffered from a vertebral disc injury that took him out of his training and performance. He slowly became interested in other things than just sports, which led him to find his way at MIT, where he went to college and where he is now studying astrophysics. Lars missing sports and decides to join an intramural CrossFit team on campus. Here, Lar gets to shine again as an athlete. He trains basically every day with a lot of two-a-day practices, and he has been showing out in the weight room as one of the top performers. About 6 months into Lars' training, he starts to feel tired and is having difficulty performing well in his workouts. He has no energy for anything and is starting to fall behind in his academics as well. Lars is unsure how to fix his fatigue in order to get back to where he used to be. We believe that Lars is experiencing mainly peripheral fatigue, and here is why. The energy supply energy demand theory states that fatigue results from the inability to supply working muscles with sufficient ATP to meet energy demands. The theory explains that the demand for ATP is greater than the supply for ATP, therefore creating a limit on the metabolites, which could be ATP or phosphocreatine system, present for the muscle to perform correctly, ultimately leading to fatigue. So how does this theory support that Lars is experiencing peripheral fatigue? It is found that peripheral fatigue stems from shorter, high-intensity training, and since Lars is mainly a CrossFit athlete who works on strength and power, peripheral fatigue is mainly dealt with here. In the Thomas et al. Article, a study was done on cyclists to determine what type of fatigue they experienced in certain kilometers of timed exercise. It was found that fatigue after a self-paced exercise was task-dependent, meaning that peripheral fatigue was much greater after high-intensity, short duration, around 6 minutes, whereas exercise that was central fatigue was much greater in lower intensity, longer duration exercise bouts, which were greater than 30 minutes. In Lars' case, he is mainly training explosively, competing in CrossFit games and lifting heavy weights weekly. This high-intensity, short-duration exercise is an anaerobic activity that recruits more type 2 glycolytic muscle fibers. Since these fibers use lots of power and force to exert maximal speed and strength, ATP diminishes quickly in the system, which explains by the theory stated here. How could this theory relate to symptoms that Lars is having, such as exhaustion, feeling foggy, and not being able to meet his 1 rep max anymore? I took a deeper dive into athletes and how fatigue affects them, and I believe that Lars is experiencing overtraining syndrome. Overtraining syndrome is said to be diagnosed in highly elite athletes and is a resultant of training too hard to recover properly. Simone Manuel, Olympic gold medalist swimmer in the 2016 Rio Olympics, did not even qualify for the 100-meter freestyle in the 2021 Tokyo Games. She was later diagnosed with overtraining syndrome. OTS can go hand in hand with the energy supply, energy demand theory, considering that this theory states that the demand for ATP is greater than the ATP that is available. Simone Manuel was training too hard, so the demand of exercise was greater than the recovery time available, aka she didn't have enough ATP built up for the demand that she needed it at. I believe that Lars is experiencing the same thing here with the fatigue he is experiencing. It is important to note that Lars is completing 1 rep max tests weekly, which are very difficult tests to determine max strength. Generally, a 1 rep max test should only be administered every 3 to 4 months, which we learned in EXAM 364. Not every week. This is to avoid excessive fatigue and injury, which we know Lars is suffering from now. In order to combat this fatigue and his possibility of overtraining syndrome, this peripheral fatigue is the cause or purpose of his newfound symptoms, and Lars needs to sleep properly, eat properly, and train properly in order to combat all of this combined and recover so he is not overtrained.
The biomechanical theory of fatigue. Lars is struggling with feeling less recovered between workouts, his performance in school has plateaued, and he is having a difficult time staying awake and feels foggy. Lars is primarily experiencing peripheral fatigue. His main limitation is the insufficient transfer of energy in the stretch shortening cycle, which leads to changes in form and reduces his exercise economy. In the picture, we can see all the resistance in exercise, which will be affecting Lars's stretch shortening cycle. First, let's talk about peripheral fatigue. This type of fatigue originates in the muscles distal to the neuromuscular junction. It is caused by limitations of a system, such as metabolite buildup, reduced calcium release, and insufficient transfer of energy, which is what we see in the stretch shortening cycle in Lars. Stretch shortening cycle is a rapid cyclical muscle action whereby the muscle undergoes an eccentric contraction followed by a transitional period prior to this concentric contraction. In the image, we could see a more specific view of the stretch shortening contraction. Finally, exercise economy is a better exercise means an athlete can work harder for a longer time while maintaining a lower percent VO2 max. All of these factors connect directly to Lars. When his stretch shortening cycle efficiency drops, his muscles fatigue faster, his form changes, and his exercise economy decreases. Inefficient energy transfer in CrossFit. According to Dr. Wenger, excessive vertical movement, bouncing, uses more energy, leading to quicker fatigue. CrossFit involves high-intensity, high-volume workouts combining strength, cardio, and functional training. These movements depend heavily on the stretch shortening cycle, which helps muscles store and release energy efficiently. When Lars performs exercises with too much vertical movement or bouncing, more energy goes upward instead into the exercise. This wastes energy and leads to faster fatigue. Over time, that inefficient energy transfer disrupts his form and makes his muscles work harder to maintain power output. This kind of muscle overuse is a sign of peripheral fatigue. In short, for Lars, repetitive high-intensity CrossFit sessions likely cause peripheral fatigue and reduce exercise economy due to insufficient stretch shortening cycle function.
Lactate overload theory. The high intensity from the 2-a-day workouts pushes Lara into anaerobic stress. So because his muscles aren't always getting enough oxygen to meet the energy demand, his body relies more on anaerobic energy production, which produces lactate and hydrogen ions. This places extra stress on the muscles and contributes directly to fatigue. The lactate buildup disrupts Lara's muscle contraction and recovery. When lactate accumulates, it lowers the pH in the muscle tissue, which interferes with the enzyme activity and the ability of muscles to contract efficiently. This helps explain why Lara's performance on the weekly assessments has plateaued, and why he is feeling less recovered between workouts, even though he continues to train. The constant maximal lifts increase metabolic stress in the muscles. Repeatedly lifting near maximum effort depletes energy stores and adds chemical stress inside the muscle fibers, which further limits performance and slows adaptation. Based on his symptoms, fatigue is coming from the muscles and not the nervous system. Lars is still motivated and willing to train and engage in his workouts, which shows that his central drive is intact. The limiting factor is the muscle itself. The fatigue is peripheral. Ethically, overtraining may intentionally overload Lars's muscle, raising concerns about how safe the coaching is. So programs that push athletes to this level may risk injury or long-term harm. So coaches have an ethical responsibility to balance training intensity with athlete safety.
So, our final argument that Lar is experiencing peripheral fatigue is centered around the muscle recruitment theory. And the premise of this theory is fatigue results from impairments in the neural mechanisms required to activate skeletal muscles. So basically, this theory can be seen from the peripheral lens, and basically exercise performance requires the recruitment of specific muscle fibers in specific numbers and in specific coordination. And if there's inability in any of that to recruit properly, it results in fatigue. So my first point about this is the neuromuscular junction. So studies suggest that fatigue is not an issue at the neuromuscular junction. Even when fatigues, significant action potentials still reach neuromuscular junction, and electric activity is still found in individual muscle fibers of each of the motor units. So this suggests that the central nervous system adjusts to the motor unit recruitment, and it manifests in the periphery as decreased force production. Next is the failure of the sodium-potassium pump to maintain an ion concentration during repeated stimulation, and this could lead to potassium accumulation outside of the sarcolemma and ultimately affecting calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And this is just in charge of maintaining the resting membrane potential needed for muscle excitability. And with something like prolonged CrossFit, there could be an imbalance in the ion gradient. And lastly, cross-bridge cycling disruption. This can be related to an accumulation of hydrogen or phosphate ions, and this acidosis buildup can inhibit cross-bridge cycling. I also wanted to include this quote. This was a study done with athletes in fatigue, and I think it's just important to note that alternatively, the longer duration of the trials might have negatively affected motivation, and the observed difference in fatigue could reflect a psychological rather than a physiological limit to performance. So he could be feeling fatigue from the mental side of things, not just from peripheral or even central nervous system, as the other side is arguing.
Conclusion. Lars's background and training history shows high physical demand. Energy supply and demand theory. Lars's CrossFit workouts push his muscle beyond their energy capacity. Biomechanical theory and inefficient energy transfer. Inefficient energy transfer in the stretch shortening cycle leads to muscle fatigue. Muscle recruitment theory. Fatigue occurs in the muscles due to inefficiencies at the neuromuscular junction. Lactate overload theory. Lactate that directly affects muscles' ability to function, showing that fatigue occurred at the muscular level, not the nervous system.